So, thank you so much for joining us for this session on food security. I'm Augustin Grandgeorge. I'm working at the Paris Peace Forum. I'm in charge of an initiative that is called Atlas, that deals with unlocking the potential of African agriculture. You may wonder why the Paris Peace Forum deals with African agriculture. Actually, the Paris Peace Forum works on global governance gaps. And what we observed was that to unlock the majority of our SDG gaps, African agriculture was key. It was a huge challenge, but also a huge opportunity for all of us. And we needed to put African agriculture on the top of our global agendas. So this is the reason why 2 years ago at the Paris Peace Forum 2023, with many of you present, and maybe you will remember that, we launched an initiative named Atlas with a call to action at the time, with a multi-stakeholder coalition of now more than 50 organizations involved, from the World Bank to IFC, to IFA, to CGIAR, to the African Union, to many companies like OCP Group or Research and Academia, UM6P, CGIAR, and many others. And the idea was to unlock the immense potential of African agriculture for Africa and also for the world, seen as the best possible investment for SDGs. But the observation that many of you know is that despite the immense potential and opportunity, we invest only less than 5% of our collective resources to African agriculture. So we need to unlock that. We show that the dollar that you invest in African agriculture is the best dollar you can invest for SDGs, actually. So how to unlock that? And we are totally aware of the context of decreasing public funding, and so we know that we will need to unlock private sector investment. We show that it's a win for Africa, for the world, but also for investors and for the private sector. So this is why, and we know we enter this new era of development funding, we'll need to prioritize towards African agriculture, but also to have this platform, and this is why we created Atlas, to create trust. Trust between partners and develop partnerships through advocacy at the highest level, putting African agriculture on a big stage of a global forum, talking to governments, talking to development banks, to international institutions, advocacy, but also policy and investment dialogues. The Atlas platform now has reached more than 30, in 2 years, 30 business and investment dialogues and policy dialogues, networking, but also knowledge and transparency through an investment barometer that tracks all financial flows going to African agriculture. Now, we think all together, the members, the 50 members of this coalition and the hundreds of members that are involved, advocate together for the doubling of investment to African agriculture by 2030. We think it's realistic, it will be difficult, but by creating trust and making the investment case, we think it is possible. As I was saying, we developed that investment barometer that tracks all financial flows from all sectors, private, public, philanthropic flows, using existing data from FAO, from OECD, from FDI and PitchBook, and many others, to create transparency and give the clarity that is needed for decision makers and businesses to make the right decisions. Now, I'll turn to Kahria Danani from BCG, who will moderate this discussion. But I just wanted to say that if your organization has not joined Atlas yet, it's still the time to do it. Come to us, come to the Paris Peace Forum, and we'll see how Atlas as a platform can be helpful to make the connections, connect, and amplify what's already existing, and provide the GPS to navigate African agriculture and invest. In a nutshell, accelerate. Just a word on this panel. It will be dealing with global food security, since the African continent is impacted by the turbulent times food security is living, with this idea that Africa is a challenge, but also is an opportunity, and that we need to understand a bit what's happening. So thank you very much for joining, and enjoy the Paris Peace Forum. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Augustin, for the introduction and for sharing what the Atlas Initiative is all about. So we have a really fantastic panel here today, and before introducing the panel, I'll just say two things that I think are important for us to sort of understand. You know, one, and our intention is to explore in this conversation that food security is no longer just about producing more, right? It's about entire systems, building systems that can withstand the shocks and empower nations to feed their peoples. And what's interesting is that Africa illustrates this tension quite vividly. It's a continent that has vast agricultural potential, but imports at least $100 billion of food every year. So there's a lot to be done and a lot to think about. So our panel will explore these forces that are shaping this new food order, how trade policies can amplify or mitigate the vulnerabilities, the race to secure critical inputs like fertilizers, and the balance between open markets and national sovereignty. So I'm delighted to be joined by this very, very distinguished panel. Starting over there on my left, we have Dr. Isman Al-Uwafi, who is the Executive Director of the CGIAR. Then we have Alice Albright, the former CEO of the US Millennium Challenge Corporation. We have Hajar Al-Afifi, who is the CEO of OCP for Africa. And we have Pascal Lamy, who needs no introduction. So I'm going to start off with you. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to start with you, Isman. So we have, you lead an organization that is known for innovation and for driving agricultural productivity and research across the world, across issues, right? So from your perspective, and help us set the scene over here, right? So from your perspective, you know, where do the global agricultural markets stand today, despite the disruptions and the challenges that we've faced? You know, what are some of the most critical vulnerabilities that you're observing, you know, from climate impact to market volatility to input dependencies to research gaps? And so, and how are these affecting both developed and emerging markets?
Thank you very much, Kahir. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, thank you very much. A pleasure to be here at Paris Peace Forum. If we look, Rita, I'm just coming from the World Food Prize in Des Moines. And there we had a session called Peace on the Plate. And the reason behind is that food security, it's not only matters of nourishing people, it's a stability issue. If you don't have food security, you don't have peace. If you don't have peace, you have no development. So it's very much related. So if we look globally, the agri-food system, it's still very fragile. So in terms of vulnerabilities, conflict is number one. The second one will be climate. And the third one, it's geopolitical disruption, which disrupt always markets. And that's where really there is a very beautiful study by the International Food Policy Research Institute and WRI that shows that what happens between 1990 and 2020 should be completely different from what will happen from 2020 to 2050. And what the study shows is that the countries that were able to produce more with less, or producing much more nourishment and much more calories, both of them, it was through innovation in the high-income countries only. You look at the low-income countries, and all the increase of productivity was based on clearing more land, using more input. So what we need for 2020 to 2050, it's bring the least income countries to be able to produce the way high-income countries did in the last 30 decades. And this is very important. That's where CGR, investment in innovation, scaling innovation is very important. And not only through public sector, through also private sector. So right now, again, if we look at investment in agriculture, science, and technology, you find that we moved quite highly to about $130 billion per year. But half of it is in Asia. It's not in Europe, it's not in North America. So you find China is investing $25 billion per year in science related to agriculture. And the next one is the USA with 13 billion. So there is a huge change from how the world was just 3 decades ago. And that's what does it say? It says that, one, we need to scale up the innovation we have, particularly in a continent like Africa, where we have still a lot of land that is arable and not used, where we have very little irrigation, where we have very little mechanization, and we have, with a bit of investment, we could produce 7 times more, if not 10 times more. It says also that in Africa, you have a very young population, and that young population requires hope more than anything else at this stage, if one has stability. Those young population requires opportunities for work as well. And the ag sector that employ, if you look at the full system, it requires, right now we have about 3 billion people that works in the ag sector. If really you look for opportunities for engaging youth, it will be in the ag sector, particularly if you do production, processing, inputs, manufacturing in the continent. So there is a huge opportunity, and I'm very happy by the 3 wins that was presented. It is definitely in the African continent right now, it's gonna be a triple win. A win for the country that's gonna engage with the investors, win for the investors themselves, and also win for the consumers. Because right now, most of the food in Africa, it's sometimes more expensive than other parts of the world, whereas we have the poorest of the poor on that continent. So it's really very important to keep that triple win. And for me, the key to it's science, innovation, and technology. So we can't produce the same way we have been producing till last week in Africa, but rather by investing in technologies and adoption at scale.
Thanks so much. I really liked your suggestions that we need to focus on peace on a plate, is what you said, and I think that's a nice way of putting the challenges that we have ahead of us, given the context that we live in. Hajar, I want to come to you, and before I do that, I want to say congratulations for taking on the CEO role at OCP Africa. I think you're there just a short while now, so congratulations on that. Building on what Isman has said, we've heard that Africa imports the majority of its fertilizer. We've heard that productivity increases need to increase. We need, one of the things that Isman said is that, we need African and lower income countries to produce at the same way that high income and high intensity producers have done. And you and your organization play a critical role here, right? So, we might argue that some of the challenges that smallholder farmers have faced are that supply chains lack access, or they lack access to local supply chains, or they're having access to essential inputs. So from your work in these African markets, share with us what makes these supply chains so fragile, what are some of the breaking points in production capacity, and how do we achieve that vision that Isman sort of laid out?
Thank you so much, Kahir. So my name is Hajar. I'm very happy to be in this very high caliber panel. And yes, I joined the OCP very recently, but it's been actually fast and furious. So I'm very happy to deep dive on this actually very personal topic. We're just speaking about food, means life. So I think Isman has touched on many points. I won't belabor on them. I'll go specific to the context where Africa finds itself. Today, Africa uses only 22 kilos a hectare, of fertilizer. The world average is 114. I'm speaking average. Only average is 114 kilo of fertilizer per hectare to give you a good yield, good crop. If the statu quo remains, it will take Africa 114 years to achieve the world average in terms of food security. So imagine that this is a race against time in which we all have to be together. And you have rightly pointed supply chain as one of the elements together with financing, together with partnerships that we need to work on. So let me just, I'll spotlight supply chain. Well, supply end-to-end needs to be stronger than it is today. So for example, now I'll come to OCP. What we try to do in our endeavor is to really be part of this agricultural transformation and move from these 22 kilos to the 114 I have listed. So, but the proof of the pudding is actually we are implanted in Africa. So I'm African myself, and we have 12 subsidiaries in Africa. These subsidiaries have a manufacturing arm as well. So we have blending units that allow us actually to make that supply chain shorter and speedier, because we are giving the product to the last mile, and we become therefore a frontline company. We also have invested in warehousing, in logistics, to ensure that the supply chain is quicker, because actually one of the easy wins is just to be on time and in full, yeah? To be there for the season, because agriculture is mainly 2 times in a year. So that's on the manufacturing side. Today we have here many of our UM6P colleagues. And the UM6P, I mean, it's known to be a bedrock for our research and development. So huge work is being carried in agronomy. Because if you really want your supply to be resilient, first you need to understand what you're talking about. So at OCP, we have already mapped 100 million hectares of land, and we have analyzed 54 million hectares of land to understand how we can work from a supply chain point of view to quickly administer the right product to the most important person who's the farmer. Third, I think Asmahan touched on it, which is automotive, robotics, electricity. Still 600 million population in Africa don't have access to electricity. Imagine the jobs creation that can help in that. And then the supply chain is about demand capture and then demand fulfillment. Demand fulfillment here is the farmer. Very little do we speak to farmers, but this is really where our food comes from. So what we have done at OCP is to rethink the distribution and think that actually we have to go to the farmer and ensure that our fertilizer is present with the farmer. So we have reached about 4 million farmers, and our objective is much, much bigger than that. And with that, not only do we give him actually a price that has not gone through many levels of inflation, because you go directly to the person who's most important. And secondly, you give him the right solution to his farm, because we have mapped his soil, so we know what exactly he needs. So I'll stop at that, because I think it's a big topic. How do we make the supply chain stronger? Definitely, panels like this will make that improvement too. Yeah.
Thanks, Hajar. So we're going to go to a different level of scale right now, and I'm going to come to you, Pascal. So we are witnessing right now a retreat from international cooperation in food trade, and we've seen export bans during crises. We've seen a rise in bilateral deals. And as Hajar said, we're in a race against time, right? So in this context, is the current global trading system equipped to handle the food security crisis, or are we operating with outdated rules? It's not a leading question. What are the fundamental weaknesses that you see in today's trade architecture that needs to come when we think about stabilizing food prices and food supplies?
Well, the Atlas initiative is with a 2030 time horizon. So it's medium term. What we've heard so far is the right policy frame that we have to consider in order to reach the fundamental strategic goal of this Atlas initiative. The question you're raising is more of a short-term one, because on top of the structural African issues which we know we have to address in order not just to make Africa self-sufficient, but able to exploit its huge export potential, we have to overcome the present situation which is characterized by disruptions, instability, and we know that this is bad. This is bad for the producer, this is bad for the consumer. Now, in between, quite a lot of people can make or lose money in betting on the right or the wrong side of the equation. But let me outline two things, two areas which are trade-related and where I believe short-term improvements could accrue. The first one is if, and that's my recommendation, the African continent, which is presently negotiating a African continental free trade area, would give a priority to food trade. I'm sure it's important to deal about cars and to deal about telecoms and to deal about lots of obstacles to trade which remain as a result of the colonial fragmentation in Africa. But integrating African production through intra-African trade, I think, would be a very important signal for the future. It would be a very important signal for Africa, but it also would be a very important signal for the investors we are looking for. It would give a signal that African governments do believe that this is the way to go, that they have decided to go there, and that they are prioritizing them over other, just more complex trade issues. That's the first one. And the second one, which unsurprisingly is WTO related, which is that I suggest that the African group in the World Trade Organization, and the World Trade Organization cannot do anything with the support of without the support of the African group. It's a pretty powerful group of 54 countries, that the African group should push for a higher level of discussion in WTO about export restrictions. Export restrictions are the devil of international trade. Now, for a variety of reasons, whereas the disciplines of WTO are, let's say, properly netted in a number of areas, this is not the case in export restrictions. And the reason for that is because of the relationship between the sensitivity of food prices in a number of countries and governments. And governments may have the tendency, in order to control domestic prices, if foreign prices are higher, to ban exports or to restrict exports, which for Africa is the worst thing to happen, because this is the place on the planet where export restrictions hits the most. We've heard from Ismahan the numbers about trade in Asia and trade in Africa. Who is the main victim of export restrictions today is Africa. So putting this on the front line of what WTO should discuss, I think would also give a signal that not just us, not just corporates, not just civil society, but African governments care about moving this forward.
Thanks, Pascal. And just to share, we did some analysis looking at how does intra-African trade happen in food product. And so if you just take the example of tea, almost all the tea in East Africa goes through Mombasa. But for it to get to Lagos, Nigeria, it goes to London, it's blended in Europe, and then it comes back to Nigeria, right? And if you look at, are there trade links for intra-Africa trade, you need actually trade links. You need to look at the rail networks and the road networks, and they don't actually quite exist to the level that you need them to. And oftentimes you have duplication of infrastructure. Within 100 miles of Victoria Falls, you have 3 international airports. Are they all necessary? If you take an African perspective, from a national perspective, there's a different perspective. But so sovereignty is going to be, we're going to get to that question in a little bit. Alice, I want to come to you, and you led the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which works on the basis of compacts with governments, and you've done this with now 50 countries or more. You will tell us, and I would imagine that you often encounter the same or similar challenges, barriers across the partner countries. As you've seen some compacts succeed and others that you have learnings from, what typically will stall progress? And what kind of institutional or governance is required to build that enabling environment for us to drive forward?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question, and let me congratulate everyone at the Paris Peace Forum, Atlas, for holding such a wonderful event. So over the course of MCC's history, which dates back to 2004, the agency was created by President Bush. We have done a substantial amount of investment in agriculture. It's one of the main things that the agency is invested in. The entry point for that is that we start with countries working on helping to define, working hand in hand with the country, what are their key constraints to economic growth. And in many, many cases, agriculture was one of them. So the countries chose to work on agriculture. In working on agriculture, there are some common denominators. One is how important it is to work with the country, eye to eye, partner to partner, on having the country identify that they do want to invest in agriculture. So it's by no means having a U.S. government agency dictate to a country what its priorities are. So that's principle number one. And that takes the form of many, many analytics and joint efforts with the country. And it also runs right the way through how the programs are implemented. The programs are implemented by a particular entity that is set up in the country, run by the country, governed by the country, with only 2 Americans sent from headquarters. 2. And everything else is done by the country. So there is a true sense of working in partnership with the country. I think with agriculture, what has distinguished the approach that MCC has taken is what I would call a holistic approach. So it's not just a matter of building roads in areas that are remote. It's not just a matter of looking at scale up of productivity and productivity per hectare. It's not just a matter of looking at financial issues that prevent finance going to smallholder farmers. And it's not just a matter of the policy issues that get in the way of more productive agriculture sectors. The compacts that have been really successful for MCC have tied all of those things together and have realized that land titling issues get in the way because smallholder farmers, women farmers, can't pledge their land for collateral. It's also a matter of insufficient infrastructure. It's also a matter of finance that's not made available for various complicated reasons that I think everyone's familiar with, that prevents smallholder farmers from getting the access that they need. And so when MCC brought all of these different types of interventions together, working under the leadership of the government, the programs are very, very successful. We also financed all of our programs, and this is quite distinctive for the agency, with grants only. MCC is only a grant maker. We don't lend. And so we're not contributing to the indebtedness of countries. So when all of those different pieces came together, I forgot one, a very important one. Often what we saw in countries is that there were different types of policy choices that the countries had that were distortive to markets. And so often, you talked about compacts. As part of the compact approach, we worked with the country to identify what were the most distortive aspects, and the country said, yes, we have to unravel those. So when we brought all of those things together and provided hundreds of millions of dollars of grant financing, which we did, it all ended up being quite successful.
Thanks so much, Alice. It's really interesting to hear and great to hear this notion of integrated, integrated from land titling to finance to infrastructure to policy, and that integrated approach driving the agenda forward. Isman, I'll come to you on this next question, which is sort of taking a little bit of that. Now, on the one hand, and maybe it's not so much a one-hand, two-hand thing, but on the one hand, you have food security, right, of a nation and food sovereignty of a nation. And on the other hand, you have the economic growth and economic development objectives, right? When you think about them, how do you envision African countries balancing between these two? Is there a balance to be had, or is it just natural? And what are some of the policy measures that we need to think about to build more resilient food systems?
So, Kahir, maybe first, I don't think they are opposing each other. So, when you think about food sovereignty and at a country level, it's a crazy idea. Nobody can have food sovereignty, not even the most agriculture producing country like USA, for example, or Canada. Impossible. But when you look at it at a continental level, then it makes sense, particularly a continental like Africa, whereby, as you said earlier, $70 billion is the actual bill of imports. And in some countries, they are importing almost 100% of their wheat, for example, or rice, which is a staple, very important crop for that country. And in a few years, it's going to get to $100 billion. So at the continent level, and I go back to what Pascal mentioned, the important is to have the trade mechanism. So the African Free Trade Agreement is very important. Unless they put it in place, they won't be able to have that food sovereignty. And that's where really partnership is very important. I like very much your example as well, Alice, whereby I think we failed to help Africa in many ways because it wasn't done by Africans. There was no African institution in the making. There was no African private sector as well. There was no African government really owning the solutions. And that's where partnership is very important. And partnership has to come from the bottom up. So as CGR, we are in about more than 60 countries in Africa. And really the beauty of it, it's over the years, we are embedded in the NARSs, in the National Agricultural Research Systems. Like if I take Kenya as an example, CalGrow is hosting many of our trials on many of the crops that we work on, or even on livestock, or in Ethiopia with the chicken and so on and so forth. So I think the partnership is needed. Food sovereignty at the continental is possible, and unless if you have the right policies, the right regulation, but also the right investment. And that's really where I want to really get into. Investment in infrastructure is very important. And I think the design has to start, like your example on 3 airports in one side and none on the other side. So there's a huge investment to be done and designed properly to make sure really that the trade from east to west, from central to east, in all corridors, like there is few corridors that we are talking about right now, the Labrador corridor, the east to west corridor. So all of this should be based on science. Hajar mentioned the mapping of soil. It's very important. I mean, if you look at climate, soil, the example in the US again is that farmers have information when it's going to rain, what kind of soil they have, which varieties goes well. Imagine we have the same in Africa. You look at Brazil, which you have a huge institution called Embrapa that moved Brazil from an importing country to a huge exporting countries in only 3 decades, in 30 years. Brazil, and we are going all to COP30, and I hope many of you are going to be there in the agri-zone where they're going to show their innovation. How did they move from an importing country to an exporting country? Again, they are using technologies and technology to guide their farmers to produce what they need to produce in the best way possible. So I think really it's partnership, it's investment, but above all, it's a really political willingness to come together and to put in place the right policies, the right regulation, and the right investment with more a regional perspective or a continental perspective.
Thanks, that's very helpful perspective. And I think that this notion of taking the continent as a whole is so critical, and we see it across so many different elements, even well beyond food sovereignty and food security.
And if I may, Kahir, I mean, the latest news is the World Bank launched a new program called AgriConnect just 2 weeks ago. And the beauty of it is that the African Development Bank, with its new president, Sidi Wilta, they are buying into it and they're looking at that continental perspective.
Yeah. and actually what AgriConnect does is almost exactly what Alice was talking about. It's an integrated perspective. You look at the markets, you look at infrastructure, policy, all of it together. Hajar, I want to come to you, right? And we found that food security. We've been talking, and one of the elements that's sort of a bit of the elephant in the room when we're talking about geopolitics in the Paris Peace Forum is that food security is essential for geopolitical stability. One of the key inputs is fertilizers. As you think about, where you and OCP have pioneered, you've pioneered customized fertilizer solutions and support systems for farmers in Africa and beyond Africa. So what are some of the innovations in input security that can reduce the dependency on global fertilizer markets or volatility of the global markets in Africa?
Thank you, Kahir. Let me take us back to a small statistic, which is we've been talking about SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, for many, many years. And factually, it's been proven that 50% of the SDGs will be achieved if Africa closes the loop on food security and on hunger, which means food prosperity, meaning moving from an importer to an exporter. And for me, I think staying with the big idea is important, because actually this is also the Atlas platform that has been created by the Paris Peace Forum and many, many partners, be it BCG, IFC, or of course many others, OCP as well. Then I pose, if we are to achieve this 50%, I think two things need to change. A, our mindset, because honestly, our mindset also sees Africa as a limitation, as a fix. Whereas Africa, as Asma said, has so much to offer. When are we going to change that narrative and think about the mesmerizing potential of Africa? Of course, there are challenges like in any other country, to be honest, and there are so many that we hear about every day on the news. So that is one, the mindset. And second, ways of working. This is where innovation comes to play. You need innovative thinking. Now, God has not created soils alike. In the mapping we have done, we have found that there are as many soils as there could be humans on this planet. So soils are unique. We cannot give them one solution or a commodity fertilizer. We must give a customized solution for that unique soil. And we call this in our organization really the right solution for the right place, for the right amount. And when you do this, actually you reduce the dollars. Because instead of giving a commodity in which you are spending a lot on chemicals and stuff you don't need, you give what your soil needs. So dollar preservation for Africa can come when we move to customized solution. That is number one. Second, you improve your yield. We have data, and I think the agronomy part of our group is quite large, proves that almost 40% increase in many of crops such as cocoa, cotton, but actually all of them between 20 to 40% yield increase if you customize. Third, you preserve your soil because you're giving him the right nutrients, so you're nourishing your soil. But the best of all, you do customization, you also reduce the greenhouse emissions. So I think Asmahan has spoken about triple win. I add another one. So the commercial win when you customize and innovate is dollar. Then second one is nature, which is your soil is protected. Then food, you increase your yield. And fourth, environment. So that is one play which is really center stage at OCP, innovation. I think Alison Asmahan has also touched on the importance of partnership. Now, we also see ourselves responsible in that domain, and we have created many, if you want, maybe I'll call them initiatives. I'll cite one of them or two of them, BIDRA or MAVA. These are initiatives that actually nourishes startups or agtechs with funds, with research. We're trying to help them achieve, this increase of yield through whatever we can help in, be it the funding, be it the research, or be it the agronomy. So that is one part. You spoke about AgriConnect. I do believe this can become a game changer. So, and actually Alison has touched on that same one, so I actually would like to continue this conversation. on the AgriConnect platform, because I believe this is the one thing that can break the silos we see and federate them around one program. The World Bank is ready. The private sector is ready. I believe Africa government and regulations are also ready because they see the opportunity in front of them. We only need that federating system to give us that Africa potential.
And I think that when we talk at the Paris Peace Forum about coalitions for the planet, AgriConnect is one of these opportunities, one of these interesting things. I think it would be remiss to talk about one thing, Alice, which I want to come to you on. The world has experienced a bit of a shock this year in terms of ODA, Overseas Development Assistance. We've estimated that on a denominator of about 220 billion, between 50 and 70 billion, or almost 30% of ODA has been reduced. The majority from the United States, but also it's actually 10 different donor countries that have reduced their level of ODA if you look at both 2024 and 2025. Within this context of a reduced set of available grant financing, and this constrained funding environment, how do you think about moving from pilots to actual action and pilots to systemic, sustained change?
Let me speak specifically about the agriculture sector, because I think it's got a very important characteristic that will help with this, and that is that it's got the potential to be profitable. I think going forward, we're going to have to, for whatever ODA is remaining, we're going to have to be very discerning about where that money should go, and then also discerning about what sectors can begin to become more financed in other ways. And agriculture, because it has the potentially profitable, I would put into the other ways category. Now, we do see that there are a lot of barriers to finance flowing to, in particular, smallholder farmers. One of the projects I'm working on right now is with the African Development Bank to help launch a facility specifically for smallholder farmers. And I think what we have to do is lean into how do we create a bit of a ramp for private finance to begin to finance the scale up of smallholder farmers into larger commercial entities, so that they can begin to satisfy not only the needs of their own countries, but also to export. And I think I would be in the school that I would see exporting and domestic interests as not necessarily in conflict with each other. I think that exporting in some ways potentially is quite an opportunity. But I think that to answer your question about what happens in a lower ODA world, we're going to have to get more discerning about what we do use ODA for and begin to lean in a lot more for how we can encourage private finance. And one of the areas I think in particular is domestic private finance. I just had a wonderful meeting, not to put her on the spot, but with Fiona in the back there, to talk about her organization named Pula, about how insurance markets can be brought to bear to help address some of the ups and downs that the commodities markets present. And I won't steal your thunder. You should all get to know Fiona. But I think that we had gotten to a certain level of innovation around finance. All good. We've got to get to a much higher level and be much more ambitious about it. And I'm very encouraged by agriculture. It's not going to be easy because it does have the potential to be financed as a business over time.
So I've been given the 2-minute warning, so I'm going to ask the last question to you, Pascal, and really ask the question around, we've talked a little bit about where we are when it comes to, as Alice has said, a shift in financing, a shift in moving towards profitability in the sector. So how do we then balance open markets and food sovereignty? We've talked about national sovereignty, we've talked about continental sovereignty, and should we think about new rules? Should there be new rules or new mechanisms around agriculture and trade? And what would the political considerations be here?
I totally agree that open and deep global markets are essential to food security. This is the way to make sure that you don't bump into a sudden disruption where prices shoot up. I mean, I'm telling economic evidence, but deep, large markets are the best to stabilize prices in an area where this price is extremely important for most of the poor population. Second, for a long time, and I remember that of my times in the WTO, that was in the Middle Ages, for a long time the conversation was about subsidization. The North would subsidize and distort trade vis-à-vis the obvious comparative advantages that a number of European countries have. This, in many ways, is over. And the reason why it is over is that in the meantime, China and India have become bigger subsidizers than even the European Union or the Americans. So this issue is now behind us, which, by the way, shows that there are sometimes maybe good reasons to subsidize agriculture, but let's leave that aside. The issue now has to go to opening markets and addressing, and sorry to repeat, but we are running out of time, addressing the weak part of the food trade regulation in the WTO, which is export restrictions. We need stronger discipline that constrain export restrictions if we want this bumpy period not to harm too many people on the food side.
Thank you, Pascal. Thank you, Hajar. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Esman. It's been a real pleasure to hold this, to moderate this panel with the four of you. And I would say plug in one more last time for the Atlas Initiative. If you're looking at it, Augustin is around and he's looking for others to join this coalition, which is now 50 organizations and entities strong. Thanks very much.